So usually with these like Zoom meetings, as you can tell, I'm in my house and they're super casual. I'm really sad that the mics are having like issues or problems, but you could use the chat bar and I'll like read your comment out loud. But I just like to be able to discuss like the readings for the week, and if I ever have a PowerPoint, like I go over my PowerPoint, stuff like that for each of the readings, and kind of get more in depth into like the terms and like what I'm looking for and stuff like that. So without further ado, because people watching this have just been watching us like talk about mics, I'm going to start with our presentation, or with a PowerPoint that I have for part 1 and for racial formations. It's interesting, right? I like to do this little exercise. Let's imagine that, have you ever seen Planet of the Apes? Where like the apes like kill all the humans, there's like, you know, no human beings alive. It's like an ape society. Okay, imagine the same thing happened with dogs. And like, it's just a dog society. There's like no human beings. I have 4 different types of dogs, right? Like there's a pit bull, a chihuahua, a golden retriever, and a poodle. Who would you decide to be president? Who would you think would have access to education? Who do you think would work minimum wage? And then who do you think would do domestic work? So just really, I know it's really weird, but just like stay with me. Who would do these roles, match all 4 of them to those, you know, questions, and then I'm gonna take a poll and see like, you know, what we come up with. Write in who you want to be the president. Maybe that's the better way to do it. Okay, it says like almost a little bit split between the golden retriever and the pit bull. Oh, that was a tiebreaker. 4 for the golden retriever, right? Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yep, and then 3 for the pit bull. Why the golden retriever for president? You can also unmute yourself, except for Tiffany. I'm so sorry. But if there's anyone else who wants to speak. Sorry, Tiffany. Why the golden retriever? Why the golden retriever for president? Oh, it seems friendlier. Other reasons? It's like literally so much easier if we just talk. Okay, the golden retriever is a smart dog and seems nicer than the pit bull. Okay, cool. Okay. Okay, let's move forward. Who has access to education? Oh, majestic. Oh yeah, friendly and smart and majestic. Okay, good. Who has access to education? Go ahead and type that in. A poodle. Poodle. Okay, why the poodle? Feel free to unmute yourself. Just talk. Much faster. Just us. No reasons, Ramon. Okay. We have to have some thinking behind it.
I think a poodle seems more like put together and more elegant and like knowledgeable.
Okay, yeah. Good. Anyone else? It has a look that is like snooty, maybe? Is that maybe everybody's trying to skirt around that? Let's get into it. This is a race class, gender inequality, and law class. So yeah, it looks a little snooty. It looks a little highfalutin. It's usually associated with people who have money. Looks fancy. Yep, good. All right, cool. Who's working minimum wage? It's between the Chihuahua and the Pit Bull. Is anybody typing anything? Oh, oops. Oh my God. Why? Who has access to who's working minimum wage?
Chihuahua.
Okay. Any reason why, Ramon?
I don't know. It just seems like he does. He's a lot smaller. I don't know how to explain it. There's a word I can't get it out.
Okay, all right. David, you also said the Chihuahua. Anyone else the Chihuahua, and any reasons why? Or are we still debating between the Chihuahua and the Pit Bull?
I'm looking at the last one for who does domestic work, and that's kind of what I'm guessing between, and I don't know which one's which.
Okay, all right. It seems overwhelmingly like the Chihuahua is getting the minimum wage job. So it's stereotype, and because it's a stereotype because it's a small dog. Okay, all right. Okay, domestic work is going to the Pit Bull. Any reasons why? Sorry, I'm trying to log on to Zoom on my cell phones too, so I can see what you're seeing. Any reason? Oh, strong. Yep. Any other reasons why the Pit Bull is doing domestic work? It's just the last choice. Okay, it's interesting because I had the same results in my my face-to-face class. They said the same exact thing. Oh, the Pit Bull looks like he could handle hard work. Okay. It's really interesting because again, like I said, the results were essentially the same this morning in the face-to-face class, and the president, all the reasons that you gave for the dogs were essentially the same things that they said as well. So I don't know, fascinating. But basically what we just did was create categories of difference, right? And I almost call her Michelle Orr, but Tracy Orr talks about how it's through interaction that we create these social differences. And so she, in this article, is explaining how race, class, gender, and she also talks about sexuality are socially constructed and then transformed into systems of inequality. So difference is not a bad thing, right? Because everybody is different. We're not all the same. But inequality is awful. When we start to use those differences to then treat people differently or to oppress people or as a way to dominate others, then we're working into issues. So she also talks about the social construction theory and how it's useful for examining how these things operate. And we're definitely going to be using social construction theory throughout the course. So it's good to get familiar with it. But she talks about how it happens in 3 distinct stages between through externalization, which is what we just did, right? Having these interactions, then through objectification, and then through internalization. And so, yeah, and then she also talks about how these social constructs occur in a variety of contexts, like institutional context, interpersonal, and internal context. She also discusses how there's different systems of oppression for race, for class, and for gender, but then they all intersect to create an overwhelming system of oppression, and that is referred to as a matrix of domination. So I have a quote there that stood out to me from this section. She says, if we recognize the process by which systems of inequality are constructed as interlocking systems of oppression, we can gain greater understanding of how to deconstruct those systems while constructing systems of equality. That is really the goal of this class, is to look at how we can one, recognize that there are systems of inequality, and then 2, figure out ways to deconstruct those systems and to create a more equal and equitable system that works and recognizes class and race and gender. And so it's really important when we're reading these articles, and I know this one is pretty, like, I said this in my face-to-face class, I'm not a PowerPoint person. I do this for the first one because I know people are kind of used to PowerPoint and it makes them feel comfortable, but from like here on out, just expect for it to be us talking, hopefully talking, and discussing like these articles and having like, you know, conversation about them. So some of the stuff you read, you might not be familiar with, some of it you might be familiar with, but it's really important to approach the class with empathy, which, what is empathy? So, looks like someone's going to talk. Sounds like it. What is empathy? Oh my God, I just hear a dog. Oh, come on, you guys. What's empathy? Have you heard that there's a difference between empathy and sympathy? Are we using the chat? What's happening in our lives?
Is empathy like understanding other people's feelings?
Yeah, trying to understand them, right? What's sympathy?
Empathy is feeling like sorry for them.
Yes, awesome. I don't know who's like talking right now, but that's exactly it, right? So empathy is trying to understand a person and their and sympathy is like when you feel sorry for someone. It's really important to be empathetic because you're trying to understand. Feeling sorry for someone is not an emotion that usually sparks change or, you know, helps a situation. Feeling sad for someone doesn't really do anything for them, but being empathetic is a way to kind of find solutions and to figure out like how we can solve things. Also, please be aware of your standpoint. And we're going to talk about what standpoint is in a second, but how your race, your class, your gender, your age, all those things come together to shape how you experience the world, how people react to you, how you, understand what's happening in the world. Your perspective on things is based on your standpoint. Okay, and also ask questions because it's super important that that we are looking to develop our critical thinking skills, right? We want to be sure that like we're not just accepting information, but that we're critical of it. That it doesn't mean that you have to disagree with something, and it doesn't mean you have to agree with it, but it means that you have to ask questions and try to dig for deeper understanding. So each of these articles will hopefully get us to do that. Good. I see questioning information. Awesome. How this connects to racial formations, that's Omi and Winnett's article. They talk about how race has been socially constructed, and they emphasize that race is assumed to be a variable which is shaped by broader social forces. It's really interesting how through time we have different definitions of what it means to be white or a person of color, right? And it changes all the time. They look at like how historically, I think Brittany, you brought it up about historically how this idea of race being this biological concept, you had the pilgrims who came to this country and discovered a country that was already discovered, which is really interesting. But they came to this country and they were like, oh, are these humans? Like, I don't know. We're just used to seeing, you know, people who look like us who are white. Like, what do you mean brown skin? Like, what's going on with that? And then that really justified why they treated them differently, why they didn't feel like the land was theirs or that they needed to respect them in any kind of way. So obviously we know that race is not a biological concept. And one of the quickest ways you can see that is when you go to the hospital and you need a blood transfusion, they don't go like, oh, we have black blood and we've got Asian blood. It's just A and B, right, is B a type, and O negatives and whatnot, right? So they're looking at, again, how can we recognize how we have socially constructed race. And if we recognize how we socially construct race, then we can figure out ways to bring about equality and social change for race issues. Okay. Oh, thank you, David. I'm glad you liked the blood example. Awesome. Feel free to chat too. I'm all about it. Yeah. Oh, okay. Jessica, you were saying that the definition changes from generation to generation and is influenced by the media. So true. Does anyone have like an example of that? I have some later in the PowerPoint, but just we're on it now. How have things changed from generation to generation? Even the terms that we use, right? Yeah, we could look at Black Lives Matter, and you know, Native American groups behind the North Dakota Access Pipeline. Tiffany, you said, I agree that the media plays a huge part in how we view different races and how those races act. Sure. or how they're perceived to act, right? Too, definitely. The incorporation of social media. Oh, good. Yeah, we've seen definitely, yeah, with neo-Nazi groups. It's interesting how even who's considered a terrorist, like Jessica, you're mentioning, has changed. You know, there was a time like before September 11th that when you said terrorism, you were talking about like Russia, right? And then after September 11th, it became people of Middle Eastern descent and Islam and all of these, right? So you're getting it. Yeah, flying as brown, yep. Or flying while brown, there's like driving while black, right? Yeah, definitely. So social construction theory, some key terms from this. This is what we see as a result of, what we see as real as a result of human interaction. So it's not until like how we just socially constructed a world for dogs. It's the same thing that we do with humans, right? We have interaction, we have experiences, and based on those experiences, we start to construct a reality for ourselves. I'm going to talk more about that in a couple more slides. Hegemonic is a culturally dominant belief in our society. Can anybody give me an example of a hegemonic ideology? A dominant culture, like a culturally dominant belief. And we could even say, and I've heard it said in other ways, a dominant culture's beliefs. Oh yeah, Manifest Destiny at that time definitely was Yesenia. Good. Are there any like current ones you all can think of? Like, would you like me to give you an example of one maybe? Like the idea that, you know, beauty means that you're thin for a woman, right? Thin and tall and, right? This is kind of like a dominant kind of belief. I'm trying to think of what else is involved with beauty. That you're fair skin. Other culture, hegemonic ideologies like, you know, money is a way to quantify success. Okay, getting married before having children, definitely. Yeah, there's actually an article about that you're going to read, Jessica, about fair-skinned Latinos are superior than other Latinos. It's not, colorism is an issue for all communities of color, Black people, Latino people, Asian people. I mean, like, it's all across the globe. Being lighter skinned for people of color is considered something great, right? And it's better than, it's a culturally dominant belief. Even the idea of like formalized education. Oh yeah, males are the breadwinner. Good example, Tiffany. Yeah, good. Yes. Okay, so I think we get it, right? It's this idea that like there are this dominant culture that says this is how life is supposed to be, and we all just kind of submit or go with it. Or it's the hardest to fight if you're not trying to go with it. It's like trying to convince people that, you know, anybody of any shade is worthy of, you know, being treated as human can be really difficult, or that any darker skinned people are beautiful. I mean, that's a fight that we're seeing right now, even in the media. Okay, your standpoint is based on your location in society and how that is impacted by your race or ethnicity, social class, sex, gender, sexuality, ability, age, and other personal qualities. I think this leads us to a good point about the difference between race and ethnicity. Does anybody know the difference between race and ethnicity? Because it gets used a lot interchangeably, right? But what's the difference? Feel free to talk. Oh, there's a lot more people on here now. No? Maybe? I don't know. At one time there was. Okay. What's the difference? Race, ethnicity? Okay, ethnicity is cultural. Good. What's race then? Or are you like, just tell us, we don't know. This is torture. Okay. All right. So race, yeah, just tell us. Okay. Race is externally imposed. It's involuntary. You don't get to choose your race. That sounds crazy, right? I know, Ramon, I see your face. You're like, where is she going with this? All right. It's true. Race is something externally imposed. It has to do with physical characteristics. Have you ever been confused for another race? Has somebody ever just walked up to you and just started speaking a language and you're like, I don't know that language. What are you talking about? That's because they looked at you and they assumed something about your race, right? It's not that it's a biological thing, right? And I want us to get the understanding of that. Even when I say that it's involuntary and that it's based on physical characteristics, that's still something socially constructed, because not all Black people look the same. Not all Latino people look the same. Not all white people look the same. But it's interesting how in our society, with our experiences, we're like, okay, generally white people look like this. Generally, Latino people look like, does that make sense? It's not a biological thing. It's something in our society that we have created. And the reason why I say that is, I have like Latino friends, right? I'm thinking about my friend who's Afro-Cuban. He looks externally like an African-American, but he's not an African-American, he's Cuban. When he's in Cuba, people know he's Cuban. When he's here, people are like, you look like a Black person. It's the same thing, like, there are just differences or different ways that race is constructed and what we think looks like something when you're in a different society. Does that make sense? You could go someplace else and someone calls you something different because in that society, that's what they're used to seeing somebody look like. Does that make any sense? Hopefully. Okay. Ethnicity, on the other hand, is cultural. It is voluntary. It's something you get to choose. It's based on like cultural traditions and practices. I think President Obama is a really good example of how race and ethnicity work. He's usually referred to as our first African-American president. Have you heard him called that? Our first African-American president. And I've never, okay, I'm not going to say never because that's not a good word for this example, but I rarely ever hear him called our first biracial president. Is he not a biracial man? Yes. Here's what's really interesting, and I'm going to say never. I have never heard President Obama be referred to as another white president. Have you ever heard President Obama being called white? Is he white? Yeah, he is. He's half white. So isn't that really interesting then? Racially, he looks like a Black person. He's, I'm going to say treated like a Black person, arguably, but yes, treated like a Black person. At 7 o'clock, I have no more filter, right? If he was walking down the street, people look, they're like, okay, that's a Black guy. It's also really interesting with race. We don't have it's very exclusive, meaning that we're not with race able to break down a multitude of races, whereas ethnicity, you can be a multitude of things. When people are looking at someone externally, they don't go, are you like a quarter Japanese and then like a quarter Puerto Rican and then like a quarter white? We just choose whatever seems to be most dominant and then go with that. And even now, and Michael, Omi, and Howard, when I talk about that, even when people are of mixed race, we just say mixed. That's just one category. We don't try to figure out what the mixture is. And if anything, we just try to go for like, oh, okay, like whatever seems to be most dominant. Whereas somebody like President Obama, he's born to a Kenyan father and a white mother, and he lived in Indonesia for a while. And he also lived in Hawaii, which has a distinctive culture. So ethnically, could he be white and Kenyan and Hawaiian and Indonesian? He can claim that. But he's not, no one's going to look at him and go, oh my God, it's our first half white, half Black, Indonesian, Hawaiian race president. We just don't do that. We go Black and call it a day, right? Jessica, you were saying back in history, even if individuals looked white, but they had a percent of Black blood in them, yes, they would be identified as non-white. And that's so true. Where this even kind of came from is slavery, right? Because I hope you know that like slave masters, they would rape their slaves, their female slaves, and they would produce children. And those children were not allowed to be called white, even though they were. So Do we see then? And so this like one drop rule, this idea that like if there's any part of you that could be black, then you're black, kind of stems from there. But moving forward, even in today's society, race, it's something externally imposed. Ethnicity has to do with culture. And then the other thing that Tracy Orr talks about in this article that's really good to know and differentiate between is sex, gender, and sexuality. What's sex?
The determination of the other being male or female.
Yes, thank you, Ramon, for talking. Yeah, it's biological, right? And what's gender? I know some of you can't talk, but I'm just saying if you can talk. What's gender?
The expected roles of either being male or female.
Yep. These are two separate things, right? Here's how I like to define sex and gender. I like to say sex is what's between your legs, like what you have going on between your thighs, right? Gender, on the other hand, is what is expected of you or how you're treated based on what's between your legs. And then what's sexuality?
Is that who you're attracted to?
Yes, who you're attracted to, right? I would say like identity would go under gender, like what you feel like is appropriate for like, when you think of genders, think of roles, expectations, things of that nature. But sexuality has to do with like desire. And I like to say it's what you want to do with what's between your legs and somebody else's legs. So sex, what's between your legs, gender, how you're treated, what's expected of you based on what's between your legs. And then sexuality is what you want to do with what's between your legs and somebody else's legs. You can even write that down and use it on the midterm. I'll know what you're talking about. So it's really interesting. These three categories are completely separate. A lot of times people assume that your sex and your gender and your sexuality all align with one another. But they are completely separate things. You can be female and masculine and straight. You could be female, masculine, and lesbian. You could be female, feminine, and bisexual. They're just completely, right? You could be male and feminine and straight. You could be male and masculine and bisexual. It's just a variety, a cornucopia of just fun things that you could be and then very different like combinations of things. I think in this article, right, they talk about what it's like when people have racial confusion, or maybe I'm confusing that with Michael Omies. I think I am. But they talk about like racial confusion and how like race is such a huge part of our society that we get uncomfortable when we don't know what race somebody is. And so someone will just say like, what are you? I think it's the same thing with sex. When someone is androgynous, it really throws people off. Like, I don't know how to proceed. Like, I need to know whether you're male or female. Isn't that kind of, do you know what I'm talking about? Yes, sort of. Yeah, so it's kind of interesting, right? And how important these things, even though they're socially constructed, how important they are to us as a society, right? And how much credence is given to them. And Tracy Orr breaks down, like, how did this come to be? How did we like come up with these, the ideologies that we have about race, about class, about gender? And she said it happens in three distinct stages. The first is externalization, which is where we create cultural products through social interaction. And that's basically when I asked you like what dog would be president and all of that, you're thinking about your interactions with pit bulls, with chihuahuas, with golden retrievers, and all of that creates then like this category of where that person, or where that dog, I should say, belongs and what they're going to be like and what they should have access to. We do this with a bunch of things. I have an example on the next slide. Objectification is when those products take on a reality of their own, meaning that people just forget, not necessarily forget, but we take for granted that this is something we as a society has said is the truth. It might not actually be the truth, but we treat it like it's real. And then internalization is when people take that belief and then they start to apply it to themselves and they start to like, right, act out what they have heard. So I was thinking about Harvard University and how even just the concept of college, how it has been socially constructed. So for externalization, I was going to ask you, but I'm going to just push forward. Hopefully you don't mind. It's interesting. Harvard is the first college that was established in this country, not in the world, but in this country. And it kind of set the stage for formalized education and how education is going to run at at a higher level. It's exclusive. There was a lot of class representation involved. Only wealthy people were going to school at this point, and then super wealthy people were going to universities, right? Oh yeah, did you never know that Harvard was the first university? I'm glad, the more you know, yay. But it's interesting, right? That like, so this, Harvard kind of just set the stage. And again, when I was talking about class representation, you had to be really wealthy to go. It's not like wealthy people were working out in the fields. That's what other people did. They sat around and said, this is how you're going to learn. The idea of college being something you have to pay for, right? Imagine if the first college that was established was like, come on, everybody can learn. We probably wouldn't have the college system that we have now, right? So this is something that was created by a group of people. They said, we're exclusive. There needs to be an application process. You need to be vetted. You need to be able to pay for it. And this is how you need to learn. Here's how to write papers. Here's how to do these kinds of things, right? So this happened in 1693, I think Harvard was founded. I don't know, years and years and years and years ago, centuries ago. Throughout time, it's interesting that the idea of not just Harvard, but Ivy League education or college or private institutions, they all kind of follow this model. The other thing is that all colleges are compared to Harvard, right? It's like Harvard is this standard that everybody else is judged against. And it seems to be this like objective fact that Harvard is a really good school. I hear that all the time. Don't you hear that all the time? It's ranked really high in like, what is that? US News and World Reports. They do those reports of what are the best colleges. And it's always some Ivy League school. If it's not Harvard, it's Yale. But it's interesting that people go like, oh, if you hear someone has gone to Harvard, you just have all these thoughts about like, oh my God, they've got to be so smart. Harvard could be a crappy school. You could have brilliance happening at like ITT Tech or something, but because it has that name, it's like, oh no, that's not a good school. We know it's not. Interesting, yes? And then the internalization stage, when somebody says that they're a Harvard graduate, it's assumed that they're intelligent or they're wealthy or they're talented or they're a part of some kind of upper echelon. It's the goal that a lot of, people have, and maybe it's not necessarily Harvard, but people go like, I need to go to a school that's prestigious. It needs to have a name. Do you hear this all the time? Yeah. So again, this is something that we have created. Even the idea that like when you go to a classroom, I don't know if any of you are taking classes face to face, but when you go in a classroom and you sit at a desk and you face forward and there's a whiteboard and a PowerPoint, that's learning. Who says that that's the right way to learn and that there aren't multiple ways of learning? But we have socially constructed, if you have this piece of paper, that means you're smart, you're worthy, you're intelligent. Does that make sense? Completely socially constructed though. Other ways that we look at like how we construct categories of difference through different contexts. So institutional context, she talks about how there are different social institutions in our society, like the family and media and all that kind of good jazz. And they set these policies and practices that create inequalities and set up how like differences are constructed. So I was thinking about the media and how the media, typically we see this body type in the media. This is from the Victoria's Secret fashion show, right? And there's only maybe 10 women in the world that look like this and they're all right there. So it's really interesting that like they're kind of set to be the standard of what is beautiful and what's acceptable, right? On an interpersonal context, this is through our daily interactions. How do people know that they're beautiful? How do people know they're beautiful? From looking at others, okay. Yeah, I likes on pictures. It's really interesting. I think someone mentioned social media earlier. Yeah, comparing ourselves. It's like, oh, my selfie got 4 likes. I must be so ugly, right? I mean, it's just interesting how like, or somebody telling you you're pretty, but then, if you hear you're pretty from this person, then it's true, but you hear you're pretty from someone else, like your grandma, you're like, grandma, you don't know anything, right? So it's interesting that we have these like interactions that we kind of like, oh, okay, this is how I know I fit in this category or that I am this person. And then the how this can also be internalized, how we internalize values that are set forth from institutional context or interpersonal context. The other thing is too, it's not always that somebody's telling you you're beautiful, but like in interaction, when you see you're on Instagram and your selfie got 4 likes, but then some other person's selfie got, 48 likes. Oh, okay, well, this is what must be beautiful. And then especially if they're consistently getting likes, it's like, oh, okay, this is what people like. This is what's considered attractive. And sometimes, and not sometimes, but Tracy Orr says most of the time we internalize those practices, those policies, these socially constructed rules, and try to act it out on ourselves. This picture right here, do you remember that Kylie Jenner challenge when people were like literally busting their lips open to get the lips she paid for? It's really interesting, right? This again kind of culminates from what we're told. We're thrown Kardashians down our throat that they are beautiful. We see it in interpersonal context. People dress like them, look like them, and get attention. And then people started internalizing that that's the message that they should have, and then they were literally going to damaging means to get it. Okay, some key terms in racial formations. We kind of already talked about race being a social construct, but what's really important to understand are racial formation and racialization. So the first one is talking about how social, economic, and political forces determine the content and the importance of racial categories, and by which they are in turn shaped by racial meanings. So at different points in our society, based on the economy, based on political, motives or agendas, race can become really, 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 really important. And a lot of times in that time period, we get this concept or this phenomenon of racialization. So racialization is the extension of racial meaning to a previously racially unclassified relationship, social practice, or group. These 2 articles here are actual news magazine articles. This one's from Life, this one is from Time. And they were done at the end of 1941. Any idea why 1941 would be a significant year? (1941) Pearl Harbor, right? And who attacked Pearl Harbor? The Japanese. So you have these 2 articles. Yeah, the Japanese from Japan, right? So you have these 2 articles here. This first one is How to Tell Japs from the Chinese, which Japs is a derogatory term, just in case you didn't know. And then this other one is How to Tell Your Friends from the Japs. And they both go through and have all these stereotypical ways to identify whether someone's Japanese or whether they're Chinese by the way that their facial structure is made up and all of this stuff. It's really interesting that before 1941, there were Japanese and Chinese people in this country and nobody cared. And they were just lumped into one group, right? And they didn't even use the term Asian then. They just said Oriental, which is also very offensive because nobody's Oriental, only rugs. So it's interesting that like they had this category, but then all of a sudden, because Japan had bombed Pearl Harbor, it's like, we need to be able to tell who's Chinese and who's Japanese. Racialization. Another point that was brought up in the article was this is Michael Omi and Howard Winnett, but they talk about how the same thing happened in this country with Europeans who immigrated. The first set of immigrants that came to this country, the Pilgrims, they were British, right? And they were like, we want to flee the king and we want to do our own thing. And then you started having other European groups come, like the Italians and the Irish, and they were discriminated against. Well, something happened socially, politically, and economically where they were like, we're no longer Irish or Italian, we're just white. Does anybody know? Slavery. And it was like, we want to distinguish ourselves from this group of people. We might be poor, but we're white. And we just want to be white. We want to identify with white people. We're not trying to make ethnic differences. And so do we see how it's interesting that like race, it takes on whole new meaning depending on what is happening socially, economically, or politically. The same thing with people of Middle Eastern descent after September 11th. Before September 11th, it was like, okay, yeah, we're really concerned with Russia and communism. And then all of a sudden after September 11th, it was like, okay, Middle Eastern people, let's focus on this. What part of the Middle East are you from? Are you Muslim? It was really interesting that people from India, the Sikh from India, were being harassed and being, what's the word I'm looking for? Because this, like, harassed is not enough, being just terrorized because they were assumed to be Middle Eastern and assumed to be Muslim, but India is not in the Middle East, and Sikh is a religion. Islam is a different religion. So it's interesting that all of a sudden the spotlight on, again, we need to determine who's of what race became an important thing. Yes, thank you, Jessica. Recently, also the idea that all immigrants from Mexico or Latin America are criminals or drug lords. Yeah, you know, in the 80s, there was an amnesty program. It was like, yes, bring Latinos to this country. We love it, right? From Mexico, no problem, amnesty. From Cuba, no problem, amnesty. All of a sudden, now it's like, nope, right? And it totally changed, and that's because our political order has changed, our economy has changed, and socially things have changed as well. Hopefully this is making sense. Does it make sense? Okay, cool. There's this great little video here about the matrix of domination. Oh yeah, bad hombres, oh my God. There's this video here about the matrix of domination. Let's see, what time is it? Oh, we have 5 minutes. I'm gonna post it on Canvas and you can watch it there. Please, please watch it. Will you watch it? Okay, it's really good because again, sometimes when we're looking at like systems of oppression, we can, if we were to like make a hierarchy chart and we were to talk about race and how that hierarchy works, we would say, okay, whites are on top, people of color on bottom. If we did the same thing for sex, men are on top, women are on bottom. If we did the same thing from class, rich people are on top, poor people are on the bottom. But these systems overlap and people will experience things differently. Just because you're a woman doesn't necessarily mean you're oppressed in every area of life. You could be wealthy. I mean, I don't know that. Never mind. I was going to make a joke, but I'm not. All right. But every woman is going to have a different experience, right? Based on their race, based on their sexuality, based on their class. It's the same thing. Not every white male is oppressing everybody else, because I know that's probably where people think we're going, but that's not where we're going. You could be a poor white male, you could be a poor gay white male. Does that make sense? But the idea is that we're not trying to find an oppression Olympics. So we're not trying to find the most oppressed person. What we're trying to do is understand how like all of these systems come together and create unique situations for people, and it shapes their perspective on things. I have some other examples. You know that the alt-right now are doing this thing, these like neo-Nazi groups where they're using those DNA tests to prove that they're purely white. Have you heard about this? Yeah, and so one of the guys, I don't know if you saw that Vice special about the guy who like led the neo-Nazi protests in Charleston or Charlottesville. He was like, oh yeah, I'm so violent, blah, blah, blah. And then he went to his Twitter and was like, here's my DNA results. I'm a pure white person. And it's like all of his like ethnic makeup is from like European countries, like Scandinavian or something, whatever. So it's interesting that people are like this, there's this movement. I think that they did, David, you're asking, is he part black? I think they did a special with him, but like, I think he might've posted like maybe some that he did on his own or something. I don't know, but as we can see, like race being a biological concept is completely just out the window. What race do you think this girl is here? Megan Bowen is her name. Any ideas? If you were to just first glance look at her. Maybe Mexican and white. Yeah, keep it real. I think most people would venture to say that she looks white, maybe. Okay, I see Mexican and Asian. Watch her DNA results. It's fascinating. No one's guessed her race yet. So yeah, I have this other piece about nope, good guess. She's not Persian. I also have this other piece here talking about the racial bribe, what I was just mentioning to you about Southern European immigrants, the Irish, the Italian, and how they gave up their ethnicity to be white. Watch that piece. She's not Filipino. Okay, I have some discussion questions, but these are good guesses. I have some discussion questions. I don't know that we're going to be able to get to them tonight because it is 7:59 and I do want to let you out at 8 because I promised just 7 to 8. But just stuff to think about. I have my own personal experience in here. Basically, this PowerPoint mirrors what you have to do for your reading analysis each week. And so that's, you know, kind of the, like, I'm talking all the things you would write, but you get my point, right? Like just laying it out there, like how to structure these kind of conversations. How do you feel? Yeah, so we are going to do the live discussions every Wednesday. If they're beneficial, if you're like, why did I sign on? Why are we doing this? Then we'll stop doing it. But if you like it and you want to keep doing it, then we'll keep doing it. Wednesdays at 7 o'clock. It is beneficial. Yay. Thank you, Tiffany. Yay. Oh, the past discussions uploaded. David, I'm not sure what you mean. But we will do these Zoom meetings every Wednesday at 7. Like I said, next time there will be no PowerPoint, so just prepare yourself for that. Come with the book and prepare to discuss things. It really moves faster and is more engaging when you're able to talk. And I know, of course, some of you are not able to talk, but if some of you can talk, please talk, because it just makes things move much, much quicker and it's much more exciting. I would post a Zoom session that I've done at another school where everybody's talking so you can see what I'm talking about, but just trust me, yeah, that it just moves like nicer when everybody talks. About the form. Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Okay, so if you are here today, you don't have to do any of the discussion board for this week. The only person who, Brittany, I think you already did the post, but don't worry about next week for the post. Everybody else, yeah? Does that make sense? So this week, don't worry about discussion. You were here, you like tried to, you were engaging. Not you tried, you were engaging because you were typing and writing on all that stuff. So, and there's only 8 of you. I don't know what happened. There were like 20 some odd people who were like, I'll be there at 7. But 8 of you stuck it out, so that's good. Other questions? Starting next week, will we need to post a discussion? And this week, can we just, yeah, so this week you will leave it blank, yes. And then next week you post to the prompt. You'll answer the prompt. Feelings, thoughts, concerns? Oh, why am I still on the PowerPoint?